So, Vaughn, Trump back on the trail today, facing some heat from Republicans for his light campaign schedule. What do we know?
Right. He had a campaign event in Montana last Friday night, but that is where today it is notable. He is going to Asheville, North Carolina for a campaign rally. And then on Saturday, he's going to be in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. But you looked at those 7 states, right? I mean, the Trump campaign had been talking about New Hampshire being in play, Virginia being in play. And this is the difficult part for a campaign less than 3 months out, is suddenly you're working with upwards of 9 potentially battleground states, and you have to pick not only where do you spend your time, but also spend your resources. And when you compare it to the Democratic side with their ticket appearing with down ballot candidates, there are Senate candidates. If you take North Carolina, there's their gubernatorial candidate who right now has lower polling numbers than Donald Trump. There is a lot that is taking place within this Republican Party right now about not only Donald Trump's use of time and where he's appearing, but also the extent to which he appears or does not appear with some of these down ballot candidates in the extent like Pennsylvania, Dave McCormick, the Senate candidate. Will we see him there on Saturday alongside Donald Trump on stage? There is a lot right now that the Trump campaign is going through.
So many moving parts. The polls are moving. The candidates are on the move. Yamiche Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, will stop in Pennsylvania Sunday, as we mentioned. Walz has sharpened his attacks on the GOP ticket in his solo appearances this week. What will we see from them in the coming days?
Well, what you're going to see, especially from Governor Walz, is him just really sharpening, as you said, these attacks. What Harris was looking for in a running mate was not just someone who is going to govern and be ready for president, but also someone who is going to be able to push back very forcefully on Republican attacks. And that's what we've seen from the governor. Take a listen to what he said.
Vice President Harris grew up in a middle-class family, picked up shifts at that McDonald's as a student. I keep asking this to make a contrast here. Can you simply picture Donald Trump working at a McDonald's trying to make a McFlurry or something? Oh, he knows us. He couldn't run that damn McFlurry machine if it cost him anything. The only thing those 2 guys knows about working people is how to work to take advantage of them. That's what they know about it. Every single chance they've gotten, they've waged war on workers.
And this was Tim Walz speaking in his first solo event to union members. So he was really leaning in both on the idea that he and the vice president really understand middle class, working class Americans, but also he was contrasting the fact that he believes former President Trump doesn't have the first idea of what it really takes to live a middle class life and to really work for a living. And that was, of course, his speech. It was in front of the American, I want to make sure I get the union right. It's the American Federation of State and County Municipal Employees. So it really tells you that he's, again, leaning in to these union workers, and we expect him to do more of that. I just confirmed, talking to a source, that he's going to be in Omaha, Nebraska on Saturday. So he's going to, again, continue to do these solo events where he's going to be really delivering biting attacks here. And then, as you said, on Sunday, there's going to be this Pennsylvania bus tour between him, as his wife Gwen, as well as the vice president and the second gentleman. So 4 of them on a bus. They're going to be going through Western Pennsylvania, starting in Pittsburgh and doing a number of other stops. I was talking to the campaign today, and a number of officials told me this is really going to be about retail politics, not just sort of big campaign rallies and the thousands of people, but they're going to be going up, shaking people's hands and really talking about their vision for America on a one-on-one basis in some cases, Anna.
And Vaughn, there's not a lot of time. This campaign is just, a few months from the finish line, from the November election. And I understand we're hearing from a lot of Trump competitors turned allies now calling on him to get with it, to focus on policy, not personal attacks. Is he listening? Who is he listening to?
I think there's a lot of good questions in there. And, if Yamiche mentioned unions, and, when on the Elon Musk Spaces conversation that Donald Trump had with him, right, he congratulated him and said that he liked the fact that if workers are threatening to strike, that you go and fire them, which is really running separate from his whole appeal or effort to appeal to union workers that he had been contending that he's been making over the last year. And I think that is where it's left some Republicans like Nikki Haley confused about what this campaign's message is. You'll recall 2 weeks ago, she was there up on stage, gave a forceful defense of voting for Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention. Take a listen to her last night on Fox.
The Republican Party needs to make a serious shift here. And the first thing is the Republican Party, Donald Trump, people here at Fox, quit complaining that she's not giving an interview. You don't need an interview from Kamala Harris. We need him to win. but you got to go out and do the work. And the one thing Republicans have to stop doing, quit whining about her. I want this campaign to win. But the campaign is not going to win talking about crowd sizes. It's not going to win talking about what race Kamala Harris is. It's not going to win talking about whether she's dumb.
In conversations I've had with people, right, Trump being Trump has worked for almost 2 years of this 2024 presidential campaign. But now with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, it's a big question mark, and there's a lack of a campaign theme, focus, and that comes from the very top, Donald Trump.
Von Hilliard, Yamiche Alcindor, thank you both for the reporting. So, Rena, you were at this online rally last night for the group Republicans for Harris. When you talk to Republicans in the wild, are they more open to voting for Harris than they were for Biden or less?
Well, we had an incredible turnout last night. Something like 70,000 people joined to hear from me and many others who have been longtime Republicans, particularly those in elected office, former members of Congress, as well as former Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan. And what we're looking at right now is a situation where we know the work is there. That it is still an uphill battle to appeal to the hearts and minds of Republicans. And what I did last night was try to talk to them very simply, practically about being a small government conservative. I'm somebody that never wanted the government in my backyard, my bank account, or my bedroom, and certainly not the medical exam room. And that is what I think still works in this era. Women will be the defining demographic of this election, like it or not. So let me speak to the women for a minute when I say this, Anna. Part of running a campaign, and I know this as a longtime strategist, is knowing your base. In this case, Donald Trump's base is shrinking. Yes, he'll turn them out, but that's not going to be enough. Kamala Harris has changed the map. That is something that this Trump campaign was not anticipating. And sitting here today, I still see a path to victory for her, even with Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada still being maybe not for her. If she's not able to win those states, again, I still see a path to victory, but nobody should get complacent here. And that's why last night's rally mattered so much. We are an official campaign group, Republicans for Harris, and there's a lot of work to be done in this next 2 months where we talk to conservatives about what matters to them. And when I say talk to the women, it's much like makeup. I don't use the same lipstick I was using in 2016. Yeah. The Trump campaign, they're not using new tactics. They're not using new tools. They haven't kept up with the times or evolved, and therefore they shouldn't be trusted to do what's right for the American people in this next chapter. Kamala Harris still gives us the best chance at defeating Trumpism.
Rena, what do you make of the new swings in these polls?
I'm still wary of the polls, to be honest. Like I said, I think it's good. It's good. A good look. It's good news for the Harris-Walz campaign. But at the end of the day, I know how many undecided voters are out there. I know exactly what so many moderate Republicans are even thinking about her, thinking that they gave the Biden-Harris administration a shot in these past 4 years, and maybe they want to go back to Trump, but maybe they just want to stay home. And that the latter is actually more likely for those folks. So I want to turn those people out, because this remains our last greatest shot at getting rid of Trump once and for all. And we can get back to a party of ideas and some talk about what solutions work from the right. But we can't do that until we extinguish the flame of Trumpism. And we can't do that if we get too comfortable with this new polling.
Jim, you've said that voters see Kamala Harris as the change candidate in this election. So how does she thread the needle of leaning into that change factor while also showcasing her experience as VP, which Republicans want to make a vulnerability, arguing she's just Biden 2.0?
By getting out there and having the conversations that Rena's talking about. I totally agree with her that the math has changed here. And I love the announcement today that they're going to put her in a bus and put her in Western Pennsylvania. Anna, that's exactly what they should be doing right now. Get her with the people, have her talk about these issues, have her go straight at the economic contrast. She's going to give a speech in North Carolina on Friday and talk more about her economic theory of the case here. And I think that's exactly what she ought to do. People forget that people in North Carolina get their ballots in 3 weeks. Like, we are in campaign season here, and the fact that both she and Trump are going to North Carolina this week shows you how this map has expanded since President Biden got out of the race.
Jim, we keep hearing Trump talk about crowd size at rallies, even suggesting the pictures from Harris rallies have been AI generated. Senator Bernie Sanders suggests that this isn't just about ego, that it's part of a much bigger strategy. saying, quote, if you can convince your supporters that thousands of people who attended a televised rally do not exist, it will not be hard to convince them that the election returns in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and elsewhere are fake and fraudulent. Jim, is that how you see it?
Absolutely, that's how I see it. He's trying to set up this whole thing that he didn't actually lose, that the system was against him, which, as you and I know, is absolutely crazy. But, you know, I hope he doesn't listen to Nikki Haley, because Nikki Haley had it exactly right on that clip you played, Anna. These swing voters just want both candidates to look at them and talk about what they're going to do in the future. And every day Donald Trump's rambling about crowd sizes and all this other stuff, he is losing voters to Kamala Harris.
Jim Messina and Rina Shah, thank you for the conversation. It's good to see you both.